We are live. Lewis Pope, how's it going, sir?
Howdy, Stetson. Doing good. How yourself?
Awesome. Yeah, doing great. Just pretending like we didn't chat for 15 minutes here. Welcome to anybody attending live today. We do these little live sessions and webinars with some folks at Enable, and it is always a pleasure to chat with Lewis Pope, who is head nerd at Enable with a focus in security. And today, Lewis, we're going to be talking about contending with modern threats with limited resources. Are you excited? Because I
So,
am.
what everybody's doing every day of the week right now, basically.
Yes, sir. And for folks just tuning in, maybe you could give just a quick intro to who you are and what you're up to, Lewis.
Lewis Pope, one of the head nerds at Enable. My focus is on security, very much the practical application, best practices, the day-to-day in the trenches part of doing cybersecurity. Uh, from the MSP space myself, so I'm took the journey that a lot of the people watching today probably took. Fixed computers for a while as a side hustle, eventually found my way into an MSP that matured from break fix and then came to a channel vendor eventually because I had the skill sets and experience to serve the MSP space.
Yeah, awesome. I followed a little bit of a similar path, doing some computer repair and stuff on the side. But for folks not familiar with me, my name's Stetson. I like to tag everyone on Facebook, and I do a bit of software development, and of course, run this is an IT support group and IT MSP entrepreneurs. But today, we should get right into it, Lewis, on talking about contending with modern threats with limited resources. I think that first part might be pretty clear to people, but the devil's in the details with
hmm
limited resources. Maybe we could open and just ask, what are some of the biggest cybersecurity threats that some of these small and medium-sized businesses are seeing today?
So it's things have changed, but things haven't changed in the sense that most of what we're combating against is being delivered in the same ways. They're traveling the same paths, but what threat actors are taking advantage of and the processes they're using through those same tried and tested true paths of what works for them. It's going to be your things now where um, because of the work from home transition, because more workload has been moved to the cloud, your estate to defend has expanded. What you used to worry about 6 years ago is not what you have to worry about today. And just as an simple example, NTLM hash attacks, where there was an attack, vulnerability that was patched 2.5 months ago, 3 months ago by Microsoft for Outlook. This is a vulnerability that affected everybody, regardless of whether you were a small business or enterprise. This was a vulnerability that allowed an attacker to simply send an email with a malicious calendar invite in it. And as soon as your local your Outlook client received that email, it would reach out to the uh, threat actor's server infrastructure and give them your NTLM hash as part of a authentication process. Again, that is something that is, for the most part, it's the same path. It was an email attack, same as
Yeah,
it's nothing new there.
thing that's been around for 30 years or more.
Exactly, but it was just that new way of taking advantage of it that made it a no click attack. The threat actor didn't have to entice anybody to opening this. Um, the email just had to be retrieved by the Outlook client. So low bar to entry for threat actors. They took advantage of it, and of course, everybody's going to use what works against the nails that they see. You give them a hammer, everything's a nail. They're going to use that tactic against everybody. So the threats that you used to be concerned about being targeted against major enterprises nowadays are the same kind of threats that you might have to contend with as a small business. And that means that, your resources, while your resources may have been adequate 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. Shout out to anybody whose IT budget hasn't expanded in that time frame. You're definitely feeling this. Um, you're now today having to counter against the threats of yesterday's enterprise and small and medium businesses now, because the tools, the processes, and the techniques that threat actors are using nowadays have been commoditized. They've been practiced and rehearsed and refined and made better. Just like, you know, it's a business, and good businesses get better over time, and that's exactly what threat actors are doing. So,
Yeah,
it,
absolutely. And I dropped a link to that zero click vulnerability I think you're talking about for NTLM credential theft.
yep.
Pretty mind blowing that it's as you said, zero click. And like we were saying, it I guess this isn't quite I don't, what do we call it? Like a social engineering attack where
Hmm.
we're having to get somebody to click a link with it being no click. Um, that's pretty scary.
Yep. And that's one of those, and that particular vulnerability is something that can kick off a all of a sudden an attacker takes advantage of that vulnerability, and then you have a foreign IP access attempt against a VPN appliance. You have a foreign IP address login to M365 because, well, that attacker has those hashes. Did they crack them? Were they
Sure.
using them in replay attacks? They have a lot of latitude with what they can do with those hashes once they have them.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's the next challenge is, well, how do I know? How do I pay attention to those? And that's kind of the thing now of where that used to be the enterprise's problem, to monitor
Yeah,
everybody's logins wherever they happen to be coming from, because we were worried about, you know, intellectual property theft and espionage and other things, and foreign nation states.
sure.
Now it's down to everybody could possibly suffer from it.
Yeah, and Lewis, you kind of just highlighted there, some of these challenges or security threats that small and medium sized businesses are facing. But I'm curious, how does this differ for like your larger enterprises, Fortune 500 companies? What are you seeing there?
So for them, they've got the resources, but they're still, it's always one of those things of, did you do the basics first though? Because there's so many times where you will have these major incidents at something like a healthcare provider or a healthcare company that's taken out for weeks at a time because basic best practices weren't followed in one situation in one location. uh, Old credentials left alive on a VPN appliance. Um, MFA being disabled, not being enabled on a service account that is over provisioned and has too many permissions and access to too much stuff. Those are still the things that even major Fortune 500s and major companies still get bitten by. It's,
Sure.
true, yes, they do have the highly advanced APT groups going after them with highly tailored attacks, but why spend that time and effort going through that whenever you can simply, you know, go buy access to ransomware as a service platform and buy access to um, an access broker platform somewhere, spend $2,000 and then ransom a medical practice for 25 million.
Yeah, well, scary impacts.
Yeah.
And you alluded to this a little bit. So obviously, the big guys, the enterprises, although the impact is huge, they kind of have the money to deal with some of these security incidents, and
Right,
so
right, right.
yeah, that brings us a little bit to our topic today. So, given that cybersecurity doesn't threat actors don't care how big you are, right? They're attacking everybody, small, medium, enterprise. What can SMBs do? Where should they kind of prioritize their budget today or start looking?
I think it goes back to one of the things I just mentioned, is even though they do have those big budgets, big businesses have those big budgets and they're able to throw stuff at a lot of fancy stuff. advanced security protocols and practices and tool sets and infrastructure, they're still missing basic items that burn them. And that's probably the biggest message for small and medium businesses that have limited resources is do not ignore those basics.
Yeah. What are those? Let's get into it.
All right, so basics are just simply the things as when is the last time somebody went and looked at the file shares in the environment to make sure that they were not set up to be everyone, and that the drive mapping for those file shares and all the workstations wasn't done with a domain admin set of credentials. Those are those kinds of things that, the environment gets set up that way because it works and nobody's complaining about it, and it gets ignored for years. And then when endpoint's compromised, it has a set of admin credentials on that device cached. The attacker can pivot out to the rest of the environment and fully own the entire place simply off of file shares being set up incorrectly.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I'd like to highlight that that insight there. That professionals, IT professionals, or whoever's setting up some of these systems, they set it up because it works, and they're not maybe looking
mhm,
into is this best practice. A good quote I like or I use often in my my day job is temporary is permanent, right? So you'll
yep,
have like some request, hey, can we make this thing work? Like, well, it's not quite secure, but we'll just do this quickly.
yep,
And those temporary patches or fixes are like you said there for months and months or years and years
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, because
So
the business, as far as the business cares, if it works, it's working.
yeah, it's up. Why mess with it?
Yeah,
And nobody's often goes back to remediate. Um, quick comment from Tu Buku. One of the first things I fixed file share permissions easy to overlook in a small business for sure.
yeah,
Um,
it is.
so Lewis, that's just like one kind of attack vector, right? Is file shares with organizations today. I mean, they have so many different vectors. Like if it's whether it's file shares or logins to SaaS services, API keys, like all these things, I feel like it could get really overwhelming for folks. What's a good way to kind of I don't know, do you inventory or checklist some of this stuff?
Yeah,
How
that
should
and
folks
that's
go about this?
and that's probably one of the whenever it comes to time, it's probably one of the most time intensive things for you to do. But at the same time, it's also the cheapest thing for you to do. To simply start writing everything down to make a record of your assets, what the purpose of that asset is for the business, what the value of that asset is to the business while it's working, what's the risk to the business whenever that asset isn't working or is compromised. And doing that not just with the physical assets, but also the data assets, the infrastructure assets, the how the client, maybe they're a retail operation that physically ships merchandise. What are all of the steps in them shipping merchandise that if that one thing is out, the flow of money stops. Um, that first step of accountability by actually accounting for everything. Probably one of the most under resourced steps. People don't like saying, hey, you're going to do nothing but spend the next 2 months writing down everything.
Sure.
In an MSP, that's like, okay, so that employee's not generating revenue for me for 2 months. I can't do that. Or in internal IT, I can't afford for somebody to sit around and not work help desk tickets for 2 months. So there's always that pressure there on that, but it's probably one of the most important things you can do. It doesn't cost you any more than the time it takes somebody to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I wonder if you have just a single tech, is that the strategy? Like have them just completely on it, or maybe, dedicate Friday mornings or
Right, right,
split.
right. It's one of those things of it's a chore,
It's a
but
group
it's a
effort,
chore
I
that
guess.
has to be done. And once it's
Yeah.
done, you have to do it again.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
I was just going to say, I'm sure it's much easier to start inventorying some of these things as you spin up new services, new rather than after the fact go back and, okay, what do we need
Right.
to?
Yeah. So it's kind of one of those things of design what you're going to do. And I've got kind of I don't want to say a cheater's answer, but a really fast way to figure out, well, what should I be writing down? Um, but it's always the chicken and the egg thing. Which do you do first? At what point do you do that? Do you try to catch up all of your existing environments first, or do you establish that path forward and all new ones immediately go to that? And you just, pick a Friday per, one Friday a week is spent on a client and getting that documentation done. And just, it takes 3 months, 6 months, 8 months. It takes that long, but it's done. It's one of those, you needed to do it. You might as well start today. And the sooner it gets done, the better. You're playing the numbers game, and the sooner you can get that done, the statistically, you're lowering the chances that there is that sleeping, a ticking time bomb somewhere in the environment that you simply don't know about.
Sure, and I imagine there's much more value, other than just being prepared for having proper security practices,
Oh yeah,
but just knowing what everything is, and keeping track of it. I'm sure
right.
has
Oh yeah, no, and
massive
that
benefits.
and that also benefits you on the business side, because you're then able to go with, okay, let's, we have these systems that are going to be going end of life in June. I always say it is easier if you know what is out there and deployed. It's always easier to have the conversation with decision makers about, this system goes out of extended support or goes out of support in 8 months. The 800-pound gorilla of Microsoft is saying, we are not going to bother making sure this is secure anymore. And I can't make up for that difference.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
let's go ahead and plan to replace these, versus a system went out of support, 12 months ago. It's still working just fine. It's not causing any types of impact to the business, and trying to convince somebody that that out of date piece of equipment that's still functioning just fine needs to be replaced.
Yeah, absolutely. Louis, quick technical detour. I see in
Mhm.
your camera here, there's a 4-minute battery icon. Do you have
Oh,
do
there
you see
is.
that?
Well, let me check that out real quick.
Okay, while you do that, I'll cover some comments from some folks here. So Barrick chiming in. What's up, Barrick? Great questions here. I've seen at an MSP engineer set up shares, then some previous L1 tech undid all of the work unknowingly. I caught it months later when fixing an issue, but being cautious. Many such cases. Next comment from Barrick here. MSP, look at technical assignment engineering that does regular interval audits of systems. Sounds pretty solid. And then
Yep.
last comment here, develop a culture of documentation and security. Again, another role of technical alignment engineer. Yeah, I
Yep.
love that culture of documentation, but it's so important whether you're in cybersecurity, software dev, network engineering, whatever it may be, like
Yeah.
anywhere, just documenting what things are just has such great multiplicative effects.
Yep.
Um,
And it's only becoming more important as the convergence of security and operations. There's used to be, it
uh,
was like you could say there was a just a slight ray of light in between the two functions there. But nowadays there's almost full and complete overlap between operations and security nowadays.
yes, yeah, quickly converging. How's the camera doing? It. We still got a 3 minute icon
Well, it's plugged in, but I'm getting no. So
there.
I may
Okay.
have to end up changing my cameras in a second, but
Yeah, no worries.
that'd be
We'll take
interesting.
it. We could take it as it
I'll
comes.
still have audio.
Okay. Yeah, we'll roll with it no matter what. Then another comment from Barrick. Account managers need to have those items on QBRs so they can prep and budget for server upgrades. Uh,
Yep.
Great advice. Yes, big fan of the quarterly business review and acronyms. Cool. Should we keep rolling? Do you need to
Yeah.
take a break,
Nah, keep
Lewis?
rolling. I'll keep
All
asking
right.
questions.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll roll with it. I'll go to my brain. Of course, I don't have a list of questions. Um, Yeah, so we've covered a good bit here. Inventory. Okay, right. So we started talking about inventory. One question I had, Lewis, is that as folks start to inventory these items, should there be like priority given to each, like let's say credential or service or thing? And maybe you were alluding with to that a little bit earlier, but for instance, if this is compromised, it has this level of access. Is that something folks should consider?
Right, right. And that's part of the something that does not get done enough or often enough is going through the an honest to goodness risk evaluation. Everything in the business should have a risk assessment performed on it. You need to know, what it represent, what is important to the business is, what the impact to the business is if you lose that asset, what the legal ramifications potentially could be. So there's this whole exercise that in a perfect world has already been conducted where where everything has already been risk evaluated and you can use that to prioritize. But usually you're doing more than one thing at once. While you're doing that risk um, modeling in the environment, you're also having to practically do things to improve security as they are. It's always a challenge, um, but it's usually go with the simplest, easiest thing to do first. Um,
Sure. Low hanging fruit, I think,
yeah, yeah,
is the
exactly.
business buzzword.
Yeah, yeah, low hanging fruit. Just simply, all right, can we update?
Gotta charge the battery
Got to
pack, bro.
charge the battery, but I'm still going. So
All right.
we'll just deal with the
We'll
annoying
roll
little
with it.
battery icon then.
Yeah, sounds good. You're plugged in, you said, so maybe it's
Yeah.
just all right. We'll roll with it then.
But so yeah, so the low hanging fruit first. For me, low hanging fruit is usually just the all right, let's do a patch audit, let's do a permissions and file share audit, and an MFA audit on all of the cloud infrastructure or cloud portals that are web portals that are being used.
Yeah,
Those are
that
kind of
makes
like my first because those are easy and quick to get an action plan in place and to check the status of. That's somebody spending half a day or a day of work should
sure.
be able to find out the state of all those things, write up some documentation, write up some next actions, and plan out, well, how are we going to tackle this, when, and how, and who's going to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And Lewis, since this is we're talking about, contending with modern threats with limited resources, are
Mhm.
there any, templates or frameworks out there for some of these basic tools that we're talking about that folks can just go download and, like a checklist or maybe one of these organizations has something already?
Right, right, right. There's all kinds of options out there. If you go out on Google and you start searching for this, of course you're going to find the paid for solutions first. That's what ad dollars come from. So somebody's paying to get those in front of you. But there are free options. One of the probably best ones to start with, simply because the whole premise of it is doing the most, doing something to get the most impact for the least amount of resources. That was one of the guiding principles of the creation of the CIS controls. The Center for Internet Security have the security controls. I believe it's on version 8 now. 18 different groups of controls, and use that as a checklist and start out at the first one and work through it in order. It's kind of already prioritizing the most benefits for the amount of money and time that you put into it. So it
Yeah.
starts out with, of all things, hardware inventory. Then it goes on to software inventory. And then a few other things will come in, network, and some other things. And it's not even until you get to the sixth, seventh, eighth groups that you start getting into what most people are like, oh yeah, that's security stuff. It kind of gives you that guiding principle of these are all the things that have to be done in place, need to be taken care of. You need to be able to do these capabilities. Then there's also the NIST cybersecurity framework. Um, I like the NIST cybersecurity framework, but if it's your first time looking at any of these types of things, I don't want to say you'll become disillusioned reading the NIST cybersecurity framework,
It might put you
but
to sleep.
yeah, because it sits there and it references out to you a bunch of other sources of information that you need to go to and be familiar with, and it's a consolidation of practices. Um,
Sure.
the CIS's controls, you can read that with one cup of coffee.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. I like coffee and documentation. Well, awesome. Thanks for covering some of those frameworks, Lewis. I guess maybe the next area. Are there any low cost or no cost tools or resources aside from just these templates and checklists, but software tools folks can use to improve their cybersecurity posture?
Right. So there's if you look at dropping CIS again, they have the CIS benchmarks. So if you've ever sat there and asked yourself, well, how do I securely configure this 2019 server, which hey, end of service coming up, make sure you know about that. How do I configure M365 securely? How do I configure this Windows 10 23 H2 box securely? That's what the benchmarks are for. They have tons of configuration information in there that, unless you are a security focused systems administrator with years and years and years of experience, there's going to be so much stuff in there that you just simply never knew about. Um, that's a great way of knowledge gathering. Then there's also just the fact you got open source tools everywhere. I've seen a few of them. I think already scrolled through in the recommendations. Just back into the awareness of what's happening in an environment. Uh, I can't say enough good things about just learning to use Nmap.
Yes, big
That
fan of
is,
Nmap.
yep.
Can you explain what that is if anybody doesn't know?
Right. So Nmap is it's there's Nmap and ZenMap. One is just the graphic overlay for the core component, but what it gives you is a network discovery tool with a scripting embedded inside of it. So you can do a lot of very advanced discovery of what is on your networks. You can handle multiple subnets. You can handle VLANs. You can handle all kinds of weird and unusual network architecture that a lot of paid for tools kind of struggle with. Um, but of course, it's open source, new set of skills to learn. You're not going to get any paid for support, but it's simple enough uh, that you can have uh, answered the question of what services are currently broadcasting on the network.
Sure.
Something as simple as that. That is okay, well, let me go to each computer and do netcap, or go to each computer and um, look at what ports are open or what services are running. Could be done, but it's so much faster with a tool like Nmap. And
Totally.
there's a scripting engine that goes with it, and there are tons of examples out online for you to leverage. So it's one of those, the work's already been done for you. Just go take advantage of the tool.
Yeah.
Oh, Wazoo, I think somebody had mentioned earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. Was on. I was checking out the
Yeah.
landing page for that tool. Looks pretty awesome as well. Open source security platform.
hmm
We'll pop a link
Um,
there.
and then there's even more advanced stuff like IDS, IPS.
Yeah.
If
Snort.
you snort,
Is
yeah,
that
but
still used?
yeah, oh, very much so.
Awesome.
But let's say you don't have money. We're talking about limited resources. You can't drop, a couple of thousand for the licensing,
Sure.
or so it's one of those things that kind of just gets backburnered for a while. There's more important things to go deal with. Security Onion. I really like Security Onion as your first. You've never done it before, but you want to lab it up, or you want to actually put it into production. Security Onion is a great product for your first IDS IPS that you're not having to break the bank on.
Yeah, awesome. So it sounds like there's plenty of tooling out there. We've got some links in the comments here.
Mhm.
I do want to highlight Alex's comment about being an internal IT team of one. He finds one of the hardest parts of getting stakeholder buy-in is investing time into security and documentation, or maybe convincing stakeholders that.
Okay.
Yeah, and we covered this a little bit, but Lewis, any advice for Alex or others on I guess that's a little bit of a people persuasion topic, but
It is.
how can we tackle that?
Yeah, that's your soft skills. Got to get better at them. But no amount of soft skills is going to do you any good whenever somebody has already made a dollar and cents business decision. You can't make a soft skills argument anymore. You got to prove them wrong.
Sure.
So that's where we have some extra ammo in that fight now. The NIST cybersecurity framework was updated to version 2 in February. They added a new function. It used to be identify, detect, respond, recover, and getting what the fifth one was at the moment. I should feel bad at myself for it. But they've added a new function, which is govern. And this new govern function kind of it can help you tell the story of, look, this is a whole of business thing now. Best practices and due care and due diligence are now dictating that this is not a thing where the IT department gets to be tossed under the bus anymore. The business has ownership over these decisions now, and the business will be treated as such. Some other examples of that is the pressure that's coming in regulatory wise. Um, for If you're a publicly traded company, SEC Form 8K. If you are a publicly traded company in the U.S. and you suffer a cyber incident that has a material impact on the business, you have to file an SEC 8K form. There was, so that's kind of, use that to your advantage. And also, a great story to go along with that is that there was a publicly traded company who was hit with a cyber incident. They should have filed an 8K form. They did not. After that time frame had expired to file that 8K form, the threat actors ratted them out to the SEC. So the days of sweeping it under the rug are going away. Another great example of that for you to take back to management is, well, let's go look at United Health and the United Health and their Change subdivision that got hit with ransomware. They paid the ransomware, they paid the extortion money, and then the ransomware group still leaked the data, and the data is still out there and freely available. They did not delete it as they promised they would. So it's another example, not just for business owners, but also for regulators, legislators, and cyber insurance that, paying multi-million dollar, extortions fees is just giving money away.
Yeah,
And
doesn't
it's not going to guarantee that you're still going to have to pay the fines for the data breaches. You're still going to have to pay all the money for the protection of the clients, through identity protection services. There might still be the civil fees and everything, but that let's pay to keep things quiet. Yeah, you can't take that approach anymore. And I did see
yeah.
that there's, this money is being paid in crypto, where, crypto for the most part is like, don't quote me on this one. But I was looking at some security research a few weeks ago, and it was like, yeah, like 85% of all crypto transactions are associated with some type of transnational organized crime.
Wow. Wow. Insane. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But certainly, I was just in the background here, kind of reading a couple of things. I did find the NIST cybersecurity framework: identify, protect, respond, recover. Drop the link to that in the chat, and then yeah, the Form 8K stuff is very interesting as well. It looks like typically, or in the past, before some of the cybersecurity issues were maybe rolled into this. The Form 8K was used to notify investors of a current event. And looking at the Wikipedia, it has to do with things like bankruptcy, departure of a CEO, material impairments, delisting from certain exchanges, if your accountant changes in control, and of course, as we're talking about here today, cybersecurity incidents can
Yep.
fall under that. So legislative uh, pieces are definitely impactful here.
Right,
Um,
right. That's an example of something that was purely business related filings and business related, communications that now says that cybersecurity is a part of business reporting.
yeah,
And that's
totally.
only going to that will only happen more as we go forward. So
Yeah,
the days of throwing IT under the bus or saying, well, it's the computer people that missed it out on this. So, trying to save face, um, not going to fly anymore. Just firing the CIO is not going to save you the way it used to.
yeah, I'd agree. Lewis, when I sent out the announcement for this live session, I think I put the subject line as David versus Goliath. It felt very fitting, having a small team, or a team maybe with not a lot of money, cash flow, resources, limited resources to fight against, or defend against some of these attackers. I'm curious, have you ever witnessed a situation where limited resources were a significant challenge that prevented a company from detecting or responding to one of these cyber threats?
Oh, okay. So, I mean, I've seen a lot of them over the years. One of them was, we'll go with the simplest example. I saw a situation where there was a small cleaning business. They did cleaning for after after emergency event cleaning, a little bit of hazmat stuff, um, fire damage cleanup, those types of things. And there were a small, I don't say mom and pop, but you know a married couple owned business that was doing completely non IT stuff whatsoever. But one of the most critical things that they did was their auditors and adjusters and their inspectors would go out and do maps and take photos and write down documentation of everything for claims purposes and for submission to court for legal purposes. So one of those classic situations of security is not that important, so we're not going to spend money on security. They did not have a good, good offsite backup in place. They had made the decision that it was good enough to back up the server that contained all of this mission critical information uh, once a week, and the old fashioned drive swap of somebody in the office was supposed to unplug one drive and then plug in the other drive every week, so that it was writing to a new drive, and whenever that other one should be left unconnected so that if something happens it can't be damaged. Well, of course, that doesn't take into account, for you would think a company that does a cleanup for fires would know that's a bad idea to have your only copies in the same building. But that's one of those situations where, because they were set up like that, they got hit up with ransomware, and not only resources but poor planning. They had successfully restored from the secondary drive that had been left unplugged. So they were able to restore from it, but they left it plugged in. They had just finished standing themselves back up, and the very next day, somebody in the office clicked on a booby trapped an email with a ransomware payload and completely encrypted everything and got the drive that was good.
Oh my god.
So now they were in a situation of no backups, all data in production encrypted because of resources. They're like, we can't afford to put, at that time, they were worried about, hundreds of gigabytes of, I was thinking it was only maybe 700, 800 gigabytes of data out in a cloud backup solution because it was just too expensive. And they were stuck in a total loss situation because they had made those those resource decisions. And this is kind of one of those really extreme resource decisions that gets made at a business level with no real IT involved. But then there's other situations where you do have an internal IT department that are competent, that do know and understand that certain things probably wouldn't be the best thing to do. Those are a little bit um, trickier situations. I've seen it where um, loss of knowledge of what actually happened. And this, pertinent for MSPs right now. I've seen this happen where you have an AV in place. Client says, yes, of course, it's easy to understand. I should have an antivirus on my computer. I'll gladly buy that from you. Cool. Take care of it for me. But the downside to that usually is that if that's all they're taking, and you don't have a SIM solution in place, you don't have like Sysmon. If you want, free resource, doesn't cost you anything but the time to do it. Go install Sysmon and enable it on all your endpoints, or something of that nature, to know and have a record of everything that is happening on your systems as it happens. Once something happens and you have to go into incident response mode and you have to start looking at, well, what happened, you don't have that information. And I have seen where that lack of information was, led to having an environment that was compromised by a threat actor. They got hit with a ransomware attack that only hit a computer. And it was like, oh, we'll take care of that computer. But the problem is that was not the infected computer. The infected and compromised computer was another computer in the environment. But because they didn't see the RCE commands, the remote code execution exploit that was being leveraged across the network to ransom that
Sure.
one box, they completely missed the actual infection, the actual compromised device in the environment. So they fixed that machine, dealt with it, and 2 weeks later, they used the original device to encrypt the entire environment.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
there's always that thing of, if all you have is an antivirus, and it doesn't matter how good of a antivirus or an endpoint protection solution that you have in place, if you don't have a record of truth or the knowledge about what was happening before, after, and during, again, through a SIM, through a something like Sysmon or whatever, you are blind. You really have
Absolutely.
no knowledge. You're going off the best guesses, you know, educated best guesses based on, years of experience, but it's still just best guesses. So,
Completely.
yeah,
Yeah, thanks for telling that story. And my kind of takeaway there is that, even if you're small, don't have a lot of resources, maybe a little bit of planning and foresight doesn't cost really much. Maybe some time. There's a cost
right.
there,
Yep.
but definitely there's ways and tools, frameworks, things we've discussed. Lewis, one topic I'm curious about is the role of employee training and awareness. Of course, we see larger companies that pay for these different what's the one that does the phishing simulation.
Know
um no
before,
before, right,
sure
right.
works. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's that method, but I'm curious, if you don't, again, have a lot of resources, limited budget, how can you train employees, and what's the effectiveness of doing that too?
So I'm skipping ahead to a this is what you should go do answer before I get to like the
Sure.
basics of it. But
Do it.
lunch and learns. Never underestimate the value of a lunch and learn, because it can be your opportunity to do user training, especially with the C-suite or the business owners and decision makers. But it also gives you that opportunity to plant your marketing seeds and your other, next action pieces that you want someone to know and hear about, because you're going to approach them about it later and you don't want it to be a complete cold start on that conversation. Uh, but well, what do I use during that lunch and learn? Um, CISA has resources. SANS Institute has some resources that are all free for cybersecurity awareness training. Now, they're just going to be PDFs and videos and some slides and things like that. There's not like a platform that's going to record the engagement and the scores of everybody and ask them questions and stuff like that. But it does give you that raw informational knowledge and some content to put in front of them that's not going to cost you anything. You can even, stretch that a little bit further. You can actually, go off the Google Forms and make your own little questionnaire for them to answer afterwards. And just get
Awesome.
them to answer out the yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. I mean, it's manual. Somebody's going to have to spend the time and do this. It's not going to be pretty, but it's functional.
Yeah, good deal. And so that's the latter part. The you mentioned the what to do answer.
Mhm.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on? I think it's probably obvious to folks that this is important, but do you have any metrics or stories around employee training
Employee
effectiveness?
training.
Like, why do it? Yeah.
Yeah, so if you go look at the FBI's report for 2022, it's probably the same for 2023, their cybercrime report. They highlight, okay, here are the financial losses associated with these types of cyber crimes. And business email compromise eclipses ransomware attacks by far. And business email compromises potentially are responsible for even more than what we know about because of just, we're going off of what's reported. How many of these are not reported? Uh, but I think business email compromises are the prime example of sometimes there is not a technology solution. There is no, yeah, there's plenty of road bumps and blockades that we can put in the way of successful business email compromise attacks. DKIM, SPF, DMARC records being set up, reviewing those, making sure that some structural things in the company, like whoever writes, whoever is in your comptroller, uh, doesn't have a path to um, create, add, and pay out all in one motion for a new account. That needs to be, segmentation of duties, things like that. But the employee training, there is no technology solution that's going to stop an employee from receiving an email, reading the plain English instructions in the email, and doing what the email tells them to do. That's awareness, that's training. You have to teach people that, and cybersecurity awareness training is one of the primary ways of doing that. There is a new tactic, and I don't remember what the APT group was that was using it, but they are social engineering on copy paste this into command line, please. So they are sending them formatted,
Wow.
escaped instructions,
Yeah.
scripts inside of emails or inside of other messages. Can you highlight this, copy paste it into command line, into PowerShell to fix the issue or to update this for us, please? So, and again, that's one
Wow.
of those cases of where there's not a good, strong, guaranteed technology solution there. It is you have to train the users of this IT infrastructure that there are certain bad things that you should not be doing. I mean, it's obvious that anytime that something is talked about and you're an IT professional and you're like, oh, that's an obvious thing you should not do. Great.
Don't assume it's obvious to everyone.
Right. That now means that that is something you need to train the end
Yep.
users on, that this is obvious.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. And thinking about some of those emails with different instructions and things, I think we could have a whole different chat about like AI and the rise of
Oh, yeah.
LLM emails. But maybe we'll table that for another day. Lewis, kind of wrapping up a little bit here. So we've covered a lot, but one maybe close to the end question. Prioritization of what to do first is challenging for any org. Is there any kind of universal first step that you'd recommend every IT department or MSP do to contend with improving their cybersecurity posture, given again those limited resources?
Yeah, so I would have to get back to the whole problem of there's probably multiple first steps that you need to be doing concurrently in parallel with each other. I think something that needs to be included in those first steps, regardless of anything else, is your playbook, your incident response playbook. Even if it's nothing more than the first three paragraphs of it being written, that's something that needs to be done because for me, your incident playbook is your cheat sheet to what we don't know how to do. Um, your incident playbook should be the first thing to do with it is simply the who needs to be called for what type of scenarios and situations. And then also have a your master playbook. If you're an MSP, you need your master playbook for the MSP. And then you also need a playbook for each client that you support. That way you do have it as early as possible figured out. Here's the matrix. Here is who needs to be called for what situation, who has what's responsibilities. Um, just defining it seems trivial, but defining everything down to simply who's going to be responsible for going and buying lunch for everybody else while everything else is burning down. Um, because once you start answering those questions or filling out that playbook, you're going to find all of your gaps. You're going to find the things you're missing. You're going to find we don't have a process and a procedure to respond to this, or we don't know if we have to call the FBI for this client being hit with a ransomware and extortion attack because they're an architect firm that designs buildings.
Sure.
Do you know what that client's client list is?
Yeah.
There's so much of that kind of stuff that you always hear the horror stories of we didn't know about this. It was a gap in coverage. Our client was not paying us to provide that service, and that is why they were compromised. Um, Working on that playbook, the incident response playbook, and incident response plan as early as possible. Don't leave it as an afterthought. Don't think of it as we'll build that once we have all the other stuff done. It should probably be one of if not the first pieces of documentation you're actually doing is incident response plan, people that need to be called for these types of events. Just start there.
Excellent. Yeah, it goes all back to that preparation and a little bit of documentation.
Mhm.
Lewis, this has been awesome. I hope that we've given some good kind of guidance and feedback for folks working in IT departments or MSPs that might not have huge resources. To kind of wrap up a little bit here, where can folks find you online, and what else does Enable have any kind of offerings here? Where can
Right.
they
Yeah.
find that info?
Yeah, so you can find me out on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. I'm still over
Nice.
there a little bit under
Yeah.
cybersec_nerd. You can find me on LinkedIn at the Security Pope, as well as some other social media places under the Security Pope. But we do have at Enable, and this is one of those you're looking for shortcuts, and you are resource constrained. Let's talk about the biggest resource hog there probably is. SimSockSor. A sim resource heavy on the amount of information that has to go into it and it has to be preserved and maintained. SOC, you have to have the number of individuals that are skilled enough to actually run a meaningful modern SOC. Those are probably the two most resource intensive operations in IT departments and in MSPs now. With Enable, we do have the new Enable MDR offering that is our SIM to SOC to SOAR to auditing compliance platform pipeline in one thing. And that lets you be able to take on, no matter if you're a one or a two man shop, offer a full blown SIM and 24/7, 365 managed SOC services from a professional SOC team, and also have the SOAR automation so that when I talked about earlier that foreign IP address login for those NTLM hash attacks, now if you don't have a way to figure that out, that foreign IP, that foreign based IP was trying to make that login, this is a gap that Enable MDR can close for you with those SOAR actions. That foreign IP address is seen for an M365 login session, immediately disable that user. And that is something that can happen in a matter of seconds, if not milliseconds, instead of maybe you've got the alert somehow that's going to come out and tell you that that happened. But it's 3 o'clock in the morning. The guy on call, he has to roll out of bed. He has to wipe the sleep out of his eyes. He has to be cognizant of and understand the situation and be willing to investigate it, not just
Yes.
acknowledge it. So Enable MDR is a really, really, really streamlined way of getting those new capabilities in if you don't have them now, or if you're already, have a SOC. It's a way to take the burden off of them, let them share the load. So maybe that SOC can be further matured into security analyst or incident response services while you offload the monitoring and response side to the outsourced SOC that's included with Enable MDR.
Fantastic. Thanks for giving that context, Lewis. Always a pleasure to chat with you. I did drop your email down here as
Thank
a
you.
banner if folks want to reach out. I know you didn't mention it, but yeah, we chatted about Enable's MDR solution in the past. Looks super feature rich and lots of different automations and things you can use there. Lewis, always a pleasure to chat with you. I think we should wrap it up there, and we'll catch folks on the next one.
All right, been a pleasure, Stetson.
Yeah, you as well. And congrats on that battery. It's been dead for 30 minutes and it's still going. All right. We'll see y'all. Bye.